Hello, everyone. Welcome to the R.E.A.L podcast. Just a quick disclaimer. If you are sensitive to topics such as obesity and weight management, please click away now as we will be discussing that in the following cast. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the cast.
Welcome to the Real Health and Nutrition podcast, where real talk meets real health. My name's Max Dennehy.
My name is Matthew Rigoni.
We're your dietitian duo, ready to tackle the crazy world of health, nutrition, and performance. Matthew, please take us through our topic for today.
Amazing introduction, Max. Today's topic is part 2 of nutrition, deficiency, and disease, specifically talking about cancer in this one, which I think is a very loaded conversation. In the past podcast, we had a really in-depth discussion on nutrition, deficiency, and disease. I think let's delve a little bit more into cancer as a whole and whether obesity is linked, or overweightness is linked to cancer alone, or if it's a multifactorial situation where nutrition is, let's say, a very major part of the scenario. I'd love to delve a little bit further into. We'll be covering topics such as deficiency, such as nutrient deprivation, overnutrition, inflammation, and immune function in this cast. By no means are we experts in cancer. However, we are familiar with some of the evidence that is provided to us through our education and or literature that is available online for free.
Correction,
Max.
Matt is definitely much more well-versed than I am. I'll be sort of probably playing a bit more devil's advocate and all that sort of stuff moving forward. Additionally, we're probably also going to be talking about, again, we've spoken about this in the past, but it was at the end of the podcast, so I did want to just preface it that we are going to be speaking about essentially definitions of BMI ranges. So we've got a bunch of different BMI ranges: underweight, healthy weight range, overweight, obese, etc. Matt and I will be using these words, these definitions, healthy weight range, as someone who is a BMI of 18.5 to 24.9. That doesn't mean Matt and I think everyone in that range is healthy. We've got absolutely no clue. That's just the definition of the range itself, and we're subject to that definition. Yeah, if a thing has a definition of it, and we need to convey a message, we have to use the definition. That's just a reality of being a human. We didn't invent these terms. We didn't invent BMI because we're not 400 years old. I don't know when it was actually invented. Same as obese, overweight, and obese. We're trying to use these terms in a very, very, I don't want to say non-partisan because that's a very incorrect statement, but very non-biased way, very just objective, not loaded language. Just thought I'd put that out
there. The
there,
emotional
Matt.
attachment is removed. And I think Max made a really good point, is that we don't have any clue of your specific health condition because we haven't had an in-depth consultation. We haven't developed a client-practitioner relationship. We don't understand you as a person. A number on a page is only a number on a page. And whether that is indicative of your health situation is purely based on a generalization and the data that we're having before actually speaking to you. So by far, we agree that the total health outcomes is multifactorial. It's not just your weight.
Completely agree. Yeah, exactly. We don't know anything about you. We're just using these as the definitions that we got served up.
Cool. I don't know you. Let's jump into it, Max. I would love to have a chat about the influence on obesity / overweightness and the links to cancer. We had a little bit of a discussion before the cast, and you were thinking that it might be a good idea to go a little bit in depth in terms of discussing how do we get to the state of obesity or overweightness, and is that a potential link for the negative health outcomes that can occur alongside it. So I think it might be a good idea if we start off with
Let's break it down.
Pregnancy, infancy, teen, and development into early adulthood.
Cool. Yeah, no, I completely agree. Yeah. So just to bounce off what Matt was saying is that essentially what we're trying to do is separate the variables here. So we're trying to say, how much does nutrition impact the likelihood of someone going to develop cancer versus BMI or weight only? So there's obviously a million other factors, genetics. There's a kabillion factors as to why someone's going to develop cancer or not. Pollution levels in the atmosphere could be a bit of a spicy one. But we're just trying to isolate these two variables and to go, how much is nutrition playing a role and how much is BMI playing a role, or your weight? And that's what we're trying to discuss here and really delve into that. One thing that I was saying to Matt was that it's something that we could try and deviate from a little bit, would be saying that, well, BMI is one of those things where it's massive discussion around whether it's actually a choice or not. Both Matt and I have our opinions on that. We'll be doing a podcast at some time in the future about that. I can pretty much say with certainty, without discussing it prior with Matt that we both think it's definitely far on the side of that it's not a choice. And that's probably going to be an indication of how we go about this discussion moving forward, in that there's so many things that are out of your control when determining your weight and your BMI, then it just probably leads to a point that overall, if you were to force me, had a gun to my head, force me to say one or the other, I'd probably say it's not a choice overall. But on a spectrum base, I'd say I'm slightly more towards not a choice than it is a choice. Besides the point, because of that, we thought it'd be worth just quickly having a little chat about the factors that of what's going to lead someone towards being a higher BMI, and then we can kind of delve through.
Sure thing, Max. We'll start with pregnancy as a whole. By far, I'm not a pregnancy and fertility expert, but I'm familiar with some things that come along with pregnancy. There are certain conditions and certain nutrition-related factors that come into play when you're going through your pregnancy and the outcomes of that offspring at a later date in terms of the status of their weight overall. It's quite interesting, and it's very much a generalization of the data, but we have that data exists for a reason. We can see that certain factors can play and influence the weight overall. Jumping from that, and I know that was very vague and it was done on purpose, so I didn't, let's say, provide any inaccurate information. I think it's very much a situation of if you are pregnant and looking to enhance your nutrition, it very much needs to be a personalized approach, and having a public space where we're talking in very general terms may not be the best idea to engage with my specific knowledge.
Are there any specific factors that you can list off the top of your head that could be one or two that are going to be important? Because I don't know anything about this.
Generally, I think that the data suggests that if you are pregnant and you have a high BMI during that pregnancy, things tend to not look as amazing for the child moving forward. But again, this is not exactly a set in stone statement, and it's very much dependent on multiple different factors in this scenario, not just exactly why you're X percentage. And by far, it doesn't mean that there will be any outcomes that are negative, because I think that pregnancy can be a very emotional time, a very sensitive time for a lot of people. And I don't want to delve too much in terms of that topic without having further discussion with, let's say, pregnancy-focused dietitians and or health professionals.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. And look, it's interesting you say that, because for me, what I feel when I hear that sort of stuff, I just feel the immediate reaction to go, well, it's got nothing to do with the woman being of a higher BMI. It's got so much more to do with the fact that the genetics they're passing on are probably also more likely to be predisposed to have higher BMIs. The eating habits they're going to be passing on to the kids are also going to be eating habits that probably induce you of overeating and eating more than your maintenance, eating above your maintenance. And what would another one be? I think that's it. So yeah, that's what I would sort of say would be that I feel like it'd be so hard to isolate that point before, and maybe there's a reason for it, but that point before of that, if the mother has a higher BMI throughout the pregnancy, that's going to lead to the child having a higher BMI throughout their life.
And that's an amazing point that you've raised as well, Max. I personally, I'm not very familiar with that side of the literature, but I would suspect that is a major factor in this scenario, and removing that variable from the data would be extremely difficult. And I think that's worth chatting about in about 2 seconds. So, of course, once the little bub's on its way and it's nice and healthy, we would like to examine what exactly the nutrition of the individual is. We know that individuals and little bubs who are breastfed often have better health outcomes overall, reduced risk of, let's say, autoimmune conditions, and reduced risk of microbiome dysfunction. There's a decreased risk in total BMI prevalence for infants who are breastfed, as well as the overall immune health of the infant tends to be a little bit higher with breastfed individuals. That is why the Australian government, and my personal stance, is breast is best. But that doesn't mean that if your child is on formula, that they're going to end up with negative health outcomes. It's just a very over generalized statistic. If I had the option personally, and if I was in that situation, I would recommend for breastfeeding exclusively up until the point where they can start solid foods, and then of course a gradual weaning off of the breastfeeding. But that's just the data that I'm specifically familiar with.
100%.
Max, did you have any comments on that one?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And we don't live in a perfect world. Matt fully acknowledges the fact that women do experience a lot of negative emotions around feeling pressured by doctors, midwives, or dietitians as well, to be fair, that
Yeah.
you must breastfeed. And we're just going to acknowledge the fact that for sure that's what the data says, and that's what we think is a good option. But that doesn't mean that you have to do. I, I wouldn't want people to feel overpressured by those statements, kind of thing. And I think you put it well. I'd like to go just like on a little bit of a tangent on that, because what you're saying there, and what the whole preface of this podcast and what Matt and I kind of do on a whole is we like to give people as much knowledge as possible so then they can make the decisions for themselves. So what that means is that when we're talking about what Matt was saying there is that, breast is best, etc., would be that he's just giving you the most amount of knowledge possible so that if you wanted to do the most you could do, you can do that. Yeah, so you're not left in the dark at all. And it's the exact same when we compare it to our recommendations for nutrition moving forward for anyone. Really, we recommend at least five vegetables and 2 fruits per day. Pretty sure it's the recommendations. I don't even know what they are personally, Matt, because I don't really care, to be honest. But people might judge me for not knowing that stuff, but I just don't care. And that's what we recommend, right? We recommend that amount of fruits and vegetables, but that doesn't mean you should feel pressured to do that. That doesn't mean you should be feel like, oh, Matt and Max are going to be angry at me, or I'm going to get in trouble if I don't do that. We're just trying to give you all the information possible in order to know what's. It's hard. I don't like using this word, but what's optimal, I guess. Like what's best for you, and then you can decide where you want to fit in between that. So you're going to fit somewhere in between either hitting that or eating zero fruit and vegetables, basically. And that will be up to you as to how you decide doing that, how you decide to do that.
Max, that was really well said. I like to think of it as we hold the keys to the shed that has the absolute mammoth load of tools for you to tackle your situation. So if you were to go and make a boat and the only tools were your hands and you had to go break down a tree and then collect the rocks to make an axe and then full Minecraft it, I think that would be quite a difficult scenario. But if we are able to facilitate and provide that knowledge, provide the tools for you to reach that situation, you can decide and determine what is the appropriate tool use for you to reach your goals of making that really cool boat.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah, and that's going to be up to you, where you sit on that and what's going to be most realistic for you. What's going to make sure you don't burn out and crash in 2 months so that you can do it long term and continue to do it day and day and day and day. There's going to be so many factors you're going to be thinking about as to, five vegetables and 2 fruits seems pretty ambitious. I don't think I'd better hit that, but let's go for 3 because I know I can hit 3 every day, and then we can reassess after a few months. That's what we're talking about, and the exact same thing that Matt's saying for this breast milk. But if we just said, oh, hey, everyone, just have 3 fruits and vegetables, you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. Then you're left in the dark as to, oh, okay, you should have 3, but how many should you actually be having? Like, I want to really, really optimize this shit. I want to make sure I'm doing my best. How many should I actually be having? And we go, no, 3. 3 is cool, man. Yeah, have 3. It's like, well, I'm not none the wiser as to how I should actually go about my business. So Matt and I always like to start with everything, and so we give you the best possible case scenario, and then you figure out for yourself. You're a adult with free will. You can figure out for yourself as to where you sit on that, and Matt and I will be absolutely more than happy to help engage in any discussions as to how we could best improve your life to get to a point where you're eating more fruits and vegetables, or as Matt was saying before about with the pregnancy and infancy kind of thing.
Absolutely, Max. Absolutely, without a doubt. That's a great little segue into the potential reduction in overall choice and free will. Not free will necessarily, but the reduction in overall choice that we have as infants and as young children. You really put it well before when we were having a pre-podcast discussion. Max, would you like to take it away with that topic?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to do the? Oh yeah, no, yeah, you already said that. Yeah, sure. Yeah, so look, I guess for me with the what's it called? Is it like toddler or like early childhood? The whole thing is that these young people, they don't have any choice around anything that's going on in their life. They've got no choice around how frequently they're eating foods. Some families could eat 1 meal a day, and that's just normal. If you're 2 years old, 3 years old, you don't know anything else other than, oh yeah, we eat 1 meal a day. That's just our thing. Some families could be eating 4, 5, 6 meals a day, and that's normal for them too. So you've got no choice about frequency. You've got no choice about what types of foods you're eating. yeah, which is obviously a big one. The amount of food you're eating, when you're eating, there's so many different factors as to so many different variables as that you've got no choice over just due to the fact that you're a child. And this, in my opinion, and is where you're setting up all your habits. And I don't think habits can be understated how much of a role they play, your eating habits, for predicting so many different variables, and one of the big ones being your weight and your BMI. Like for
well
me,
said for that, Mark.
I'd put it up there with probably under genetics as to like one of the biggest indicators of your BMI, your eating habits.
Absolutely, without a doubt. I would almost say that it's probably more influential. I don't think that's very controversial to say as well.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I'm willing to accept that. Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay.
For BMI solely.
For
not
for
other
BMI
variables.
specifically.
Yes.
Yeah. We as a species crave choice. We struggle without the ability to choice, and we see that with young infants all the way up until our very old age. Hopefully, once we hit the 200 mark, we still want to be making choices for our own well-being, and infants are no different. They often make the choices that they can, and one of the only things they can control is what they put in their mouth. That may lead to some less favorable relationships with food, and that's definitely a topic that we want to discuss further in a future podcast. If you would like to hear that topic, please comment below and or chuck us an email. We'd love to hear what your opinions are and what your questions are specifically related to that. But in the meantime, Max, I'd love to talk about moving a little bit further on, skipping over a few years, going over that childhood phase and talking about those teenage years, just briefly having a chat about the influences and potential factors that go into scenario of predicting our future BMI.
Yeah. So I guess we've had, these childhood years, which we haven't had control over, have really shaped how we're eating and shaped our eating habits. And now we're in a period, as you were saying, Matt, where we do start to gain a bit more autonomy, in that we're in our young adolescent years is probably where most people start to really focus on their body image a lot more, I would say. In comparing people under 10 versus over 10 or over 12 as to how much they care about their body image, I'd say you'd see a big disparity between those two ages. And point being is that once you've got more autonomy, plus you start to care about your body image, you're really going to be changing, most likely going to be changing the way you're eating and your eating habits. And that's a really obviously dangerous territory, and there's a lot to be said about that. But I guess the point for me is that what we're doing is we've had two really crucial points in our early point of our life where we're developing lifelong habits, and that's going to impact us lifelong. And because Matt was saying before that these habits are going to be probably the number one predictor for our weight moving forward, we want to make sure we're doing the best we can in order to give us as good of an opportunity as possible to, get us within a healthy weight range, really.
Absolutely, Max. Absolutely. The teenage years are such a delicate and malleable period of time for us, especially from a brain development perspective, with, of course, acknowledging the huge brain development as we have throughout our childhood. But the ability for us to set up really great foundation is understated, especially as we acknowledge that things like atherosclerosis and plaque development in our arteries starts from our late teens. So it's not a situation of, it's a problem for later in life. Well, yeah, it's a problem when you have a heart attack, but that's the symptom of an extended period of time of, let's say, a period of time where we're not working towards those health-centered goals.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, I think that's a good point that you made there about that. Whilst when we're understanding, so yes, I'm just trying to put it right. So when we're understanding like heart attacks, obviously it matters a lot. At any point of your life, it's going to be a really important element of that. If you can change today, or if you can change in 10 years, it's going to be a really good thing. Yeah. But what Matt's saying is that there is evidence to show that there's, as you were saying, what was it, the plaque? I've never read that before. What was it, Matt? The plaque.
Well, that plaque development starts in your late teens.
Yeah, sure. So that means essentially, for Matt, can you give us a layman's definition of plaque?
It's, let's say, the sticky stuff that's not meant to be there sticks into your arteries, which your blood flows through. And then if that gets too clogged, it can stop blood flow to where it needs to go. Things start to die. That's called a heart attack and or a stroke, major adverse cardiac event. Generally not a very nice experience from what I've heard.
Cool. Yeah. So not good.
Not good. Yeah, not good. Not good.
So I think So like what you said was really good in that. Whilst it's super important, is that if you just have had a heart attack, obviously it's important to get everything on track, but it's also important that any day, whether it's today or tomorrow or yesterday, it's really important to get on track. And there's no time where it's like, oh, I've hit 40 now, better start cracking down. It's like, yeah, sure. Once you have hit 40, probably a good idea to start cracking down, but also probably a good idea once you've hit 39 to start cracking down too, or 25. There's no one age where it's like, yep, here's the time to start cracking down.
Absolutely. And if you listen to the part 1 of this podcast, we definitely had a little bit more in-depth conversation of an investment perspective rather than an expense perspective, because of course you're only investing in your longevity and your total health overall. But by no means does it mean that at any stage can you take your foot off of the pedal completely. It's very much a situation of what's maintainable. How can you make sure that engine keeps running for an extended period of time? Even if you've had a heart attack, the prevalence of having another heart attack in like the next 5 years is what, like 50% or something crazy like that.
Yep.
So it's very important that we acknowledge that you have the control and have the power to adjust and change the situation you're in, despite these cards being stacked against you.
Mm-hmm. Yep, cool. Okay, so look, I think what we've established just from the get-go, and I think both Matt and I would pretty much agree in that the BMI you've got, the BMI you're given as an adult, essentially, there's just the number that's essentially like thrown to you. That sounds really oversimplified in that you've still been a person to get to that point. But when you wake up at 25 and you've got your BMI, that Matt and I would say mostly is going to be not by choice. No one chooses to be a BMI of 30 kind of thing. So essentially what we're saying is that we've got two people. We've got a person A who's a BMI of 20 who does everything right, perfect sleep, perfect, no stress, eats in accordance to the Australian dietary guidelines and exercises in accordance to is it the Australian dietary guidelines, or like what exercise guidelines are there out there? Because I know we get given exercise guidelines, but what are they actually called?
I just usually say, Mr. Government Man says some things, and sometimes I listen.
Sure. So that 150 minutes of exercise or 350 minutes of moderate exercise or some bullshit, whatever it is. If he's ticking all those boxes versus another guy who's a BMI of 28, ticking all those boxes, Matt and I would be pretty much agreeing that the person who's a BMI of 28 is going to have a higher chance of developing cancer. Yeah. Matt, take us through, before we delve into the nutrition factors, because we've also got the other scenario, which would be a person who is a BMI of 20, who's doing everything right except for his nutrition, and the nutrition is really poor, eating lots of carcinogenic foods and doing a really poor job managing the nutrition, versus a person who's a BMI of 28 who is doing everything perfectly. There's a bit of nuance there in that I think we both agree that the person who has a BMI of 20 is probably more likely to develop cancer.
Yeah, I would lean towards that. I think that's probably the case in this specific scenario, without looking at his blood work or anything along those lines, just from a very brief discussion. If you've got your life, let's say, not catered towards your long-term health outcomes, but you are of a lower BMI, you do have some benefit of reduction in some diseases, but I think that cancer reduction may not be one of the biggest pros of that specific scenario.
Guys, quick ad break. We are currently taking on clients. Click the first link in the description to explore more. Back to it. Sure. Let's delve into when both cases are doing everything they can. They're living the perfect life and just happen to be different BMIs. What's going to be the differences between these two people and their cancer risk?
Well, that's an extremely interesting conversation to have, Max. And I absolutely love that you catered towards that little tangent right there. So being overweight or obese as let's say a class, generally comes with a couple of not so lovely health concerns that come along with it. We know that the obesity and overweightness in general increases risk of cancer, heart disease, type 2 diabetes. We've got immune dysfunction, as well as chronic inflammation, altered cell of immune response, and increased risk of chronic diseases overall. The key one, which I think is quite interesting related to cancer function, is specifically the altered immune function and chronic inflammation. Inflammation is a good thing when it's localized and when it's, let's say, within normal body functions. If you get a punch in your arm, like Max does whenever he sees me because he loves me so much, that's probably going to swell up a little bit, which is a localized inflammation response. That's your blood flowing to that area, taking out all the bad stuff that's been damaged, replacing it with good stuff that can heal that area. And then generally that inflammation goes down over time. The chronic inflammation that we see from overweight/obese individuals, and it increases the higher the weight goes, is generally not so amazing. It's a low grade of constant inflammation over the entire body, providing constant damage through a variety of different mechanisms. Specifically in this case that I'm referring to is constant damage to our DNA.
Okay.
If DNA gets damaged in a certain way, the cell that has that DNA can start to produce more rapidly. If that production occurs too rapidly and our immune cells can't attack it and delete it and stop it, that generally progresses into a tumor and or cancer. That's what we generally think of in terms of cancer. It's extremely interesting to me, the topic of inflammation. I'm by no means an expert, but from my awareness, I've heard people on the internet say, "Oh, it's sugar. It's sugar that's causing inflammation. Any sugar causes inflammation. It's any calories that causes inflammation. It's your exposure to microplastics that's causing the inflammation. It's not your weight overall." From what I can understand from the literature, and is going a little bit in depth in terms of my level of knowledge, is that any calorie surplus provides the same level of inflammation response regardless of where the calories come from. So it doesn't matter if you're eating sugar, doesn't matter if you're eating fats, with exception to saturated fat, doesn't matter if you're eating a ton of carbs or a ton of protein. Generally, any calorie surplus provides that inflammatory response. And generally, if you are of the overweight or obese variety, you will have an increased chronic reinflammation response with, I presume, a high proclivity towards the inflammatory response from excess calories or additional calories on a daily basis.
I got two things to talk about there. I'm really super interested in what you're saying. So first thing is you said except for saturated fats. Why is that?
Saturated fat's a bit of an odd one. From what I can tell, saturated fat alone is inducive of negative health outcomes across the entire body. And from what I can tell, it provides increased rates of inflammation response regardless of the amount of calories consumed. I'm not entirely sure why. I presume it's something to do with the... Yeah, look, I'd be completely lying if I knew exactly why. I think it's something that I definitely need to look further into. But from my awareness, I think saturated fats have a fair bit of stuff going for them that's not so good. And my general recommendation is to reduce it to under the acceptable level, which is from, I believe, less than 10% of your total fat intake, I think. Max, do you have any comments on that one?
Yeah. So yeah, definitely is under 10%. Absolutely, that's for sure. Yeah. Okay. So look, it seems like the saturated fats is a bit complicated, but probably a little bit too. We probably don't know enough about it. I definitely don't know enough about it, and it sounds like you're not like super in depth on it to be able to explain it super thoroughly. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm aware of what can happen when you intake saturated fat and the potential outcomes on health. The mechanism behind it, I'm not too familiar with myself, and I'd like to have a conversation with anybody who is more familiar with that. Comment below and or send us an email because I'd love to have a little bit of a chat about that.
One of the things I really want to touch on is this is an issue I've had. I've heard it so much, and I've heard it in a decent amount of science-based field as well. So maybe I'm just completely wrong, or maybe everyone else is wrong. I don't know. Usually when you say everyone else is wrong, you're the person that's wrong. But I've found at least. But what I've noticed is that people like, and I'm not trying to accuse you of anything, but I hear a lot of people saying, oh, when the surplus comes from carbs or fats or protein or whatever it is, like, did you say that before? Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, so I don't think it matters where the energy comes from, where the calories come from.
Yeah.
It's more so that any calorie surplus results in an inflammatory response.
Yeah. Okay, it's just because I've heard this argument before, and this is a tiny bit of an extreme tangent actually, but I've heard this argument before in that when people will say, oh, you can eat as much protein as you like because mechanistically and physiologically, protein is very difficult to convert to fat. So amino acids are very difficult to convert to adipose tissue. And sure, that's absolutely fine. Like, that's fine to say. But, and then so they're saying you can eat as much protein as you like, because if the protein is in the surplus, then it can't really convert to fat, and happy days, right? All right, sure. Let's take that on true. Let's just say it's true. Let's not even try and talk about whether that's true or not. Let's just say it's true. The main issue I have that is that essentially you're saying, oh, I'm going to tell my body to choose for the surplus that I'm in, to choose that as the protein bit. So like, for example, you eat that throughout the whole day, you have carbs, fats, proteins, and then for some reason you think your body's going to choose the protein as the thing that's going to be the surplus. Like, you've got no choice as to what is the surplus nutrient, or the surplus of energy. So like, I guess at the same point for this as well is that even if it was like, let's say in this hypothetical scenario of what you were saying there before about the inflammation, let's say it was just carbs, right? Or let's say it was just protein. Protein was the thing that caused the inflammation. Then everyone is having protein all day, every day, and no one gets to choose what nutrient is the thing that leads them into the surplus, right? Because we have breakfast, which is full of carbs, protein, fat, lunch full of carb, protein, fat, dinner full of carb, protein, fat. Your body's not, you can't just tell your body like, oh, hey, just quickly, can we make the surplus the protein for today? Can we just chuck that in the surplus bit so I don't gain any fat? It doesn't work that way. The body's going to choose the fat to make the fat, kind of thing. So I guess that's my point, is that from my understanding, it just doesn't work that way. Like, even if you were in 1,000 calorie surplus and you had 500 calories worth of fat, 500 calories worth of carbs, and 3,000 calories worth of protein, you're still in that surplus, and your body will just use the fat that you've eaten throughout the day and the carbs that you've eaten throughout the day to put on adipose tissue. Does that make sense, what I just said?
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense in terms of my understanding. I think it's important to get across that our body has specific functions and roles for the nutrients of protein and specific fats, where, let's say, a lot of the fats and a lot of the carbohydrates are just used for energy. So I think that the body will generally tend to use protein for organ function and for, let's say, hormone function, as well as muscle building, which is probably the largest sink of protein in the body. And then the fats that we have in terms of essential fatty acids go to general human functions which we need to live on a daily to weekly basis. Carbohydrates, as I'm aware, tend to be primarily for our energy source and or feeding our microbiome, which has a whole ton of, let's say, helpful, positive health impacts. I just can't make any concrete comments because I don't think the evidence is there yet.
Yeah, look, I think I tend to disagree. I think I would say overall only a small percentage of the protein you actually eat is. I've got no idea what I'm talking about, by the way. But let's say a small percentage of protein you're actually eating is going to be the thing that's going to be used for, as you said, like the, like cell repair and all that sort of stuff, muscle building, etc. And then most of it's, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. But like, I would say most of it would get transferred. So there's a thing called gluconeogenesis, which essentially is the transfer of things in the body to become glucose. One of those being amino acids and protein. So I don't know. My best guess is that only a small percentage of protein gets used for that sort of stuff. And that's just on the basis that because I remember there's something being about like you only have like 4 grams of muscle protein synthesis a day or something like that. Or like whatever the max is. I can't remember what the max is. It's a very small amount. So for me, it's like, well, if it's only a very small amount that you're actually synthesizing, then all the rest is going to glucose, right?
Potentially. I think that's an extremely interesting topic, and I don't know enough to comment on it with any definite or concrete answers. I think it would definitely range on the kind of person, and I'm not entirely sure where I would place my percentage of conversion on the line.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a better conversation tailored towards maybe Lane Norton or something like that.
That's his domain, exactly. Yeah. So Yeah, I guess for me, I'd guess it's actually a very small percentage, and the rest of it, and a lot of it gets converted back to glucose. And same for fats, I'd say a very small percentage, because like objectively, we only need a very small amount of essential fatty acids. You know what I mean? So I'd say the same thing for fats. Like we only use a very small amount for the essential fatty acids that we need, and the rest probably just go to energy production. I would my best guess, because it just doesn't make sense, Matt. From a, I think I'm right, because it just doesn't make sense from an energy POV in that like then if that energy got wasted, where's it going? Like, where's it going? Uh yeah. Where's it going? Yeah.
Well, it's getting stored, isn't it?
Wait. So can you say me? Can you give me your point again? Can you give me your take?
The entire take, or just the protein being utilized?
Yeah, protein and fat being utilized. Yeah.
Sure. There is a percentage, and I'm not entirely sure of this now because you're starting to question my logic here, which I think is great. There's a percentage of the protein and fat that we intake that is used for
Bodily functions.
human biological functions,
Yeah.
which is not specifically for energy production and or the running of
Yeah.
cellular functions through energy specifically.
Yeah. I would just say it's a very low percentage in my opinion, from my understanding. I'd say it's a very low percentage from both.
Yeah,
protein and
interesting.
fat. Yeah.
Very interesting.
Okay, cool. So we got very very sidetracked there. So let's detail back. Where did
Sure
we finish
thing.
off on?
Sure thing. We were finishing off on the links between total weight mass and the potential for increased cancer. There are some potential mechanisms at play, regardless of the situation. But I'm wondering how much of that is influenced by our nutrition, because we see it, we're observing it, and there are a couple of mechanisms that I'm not completely aware of and familiar with on an intimate basis. But I think delving into generalizations and assumptions of the people who are at an overweight perspective or position, their lifestyle choices and nutrition factors, how much of that is influencing negative health outcomes? And do we even have any good data to support our claims?
Okay, so correct me if I interpret what you said correctly, but I essentially you're saying how are we going to separate all the other factors out from them being obese?
Not necessarily all the other factors, but how much of nutrition is a part of that entire cancer risk? Remember to check the link in the description or our website for our consultations. Back to it.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I guess so. Yes. Oh, right. Okay, so I get your point. So I guess just to summarize, so we established that there are decently like would you say they're theoretical reasons as to if someone is obese, how they'd have a higher proclivity for developing cancer? Is that
Yes.
yeah? So there's theoretical reasons. Doesn't mean it's actually been studied in a a double, triple blinded, whatever you want to call it, RCT study where there's like actually really good solid evidence. All I'm saying is the theoretical pathways as to why this could happen for people who are overweight or obese to have increased rates of developing cancer. Now I think we've transitioned on to if we've got someone who is, if we've got two people who are at BMI of 20 and one of them is doing everything absolutely perfect and the other person is doing everything perfect except their nutrition is god awful. They don't eat anything. They eat a bunch of carcinogenic foods and they're doing a really bad job from a cancer point of view. What's going to be the rate of difference between that cancer? Is that what we're talking about now?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's probably a conversation of, and I acknowledge that we're probably going to finish up relatively soon, but jumping over a few key nutrients and the potential for deficiency and or suboptimal intake, I think it might be quite interesting to have a little bit of a discussion.
Yeah, cool. So let's go through what are some key carcinogenic foods. I know off the top of my head, we've got obviously red meat's a big one that's spouted a lot for carcinogenic
Stirring the
foods.
pot there, Max. I tend to almost disagree, but
Yeah.
look, let's say that red meat for the sake of this conversation is carcinogenic. Yep.
Yeah, sure. I guess so. The point will be that if someone is eating, let's just say, continuing on with this hypothetical, if someone is eating a lot of red meat foods, they're not doing good things from a cancer point of view with their nutrition. If that makes sense. So if we can just pretend that red meat causes cancer, and you eat a lot of red meat, that's bad.
So I'm not entirely aware of any other ones that are specifically carcinogenic food wise?
So we've got like your deli meats, so your processed meats. So they're actually
Yeah.
quite potent. I don't think there's any disagreements on that one. They're quite potent for bowel cancer. Your processed meats, and there's recommendations. Pretty sure off the top of my head, the recommendations are less than 50 grams of deli meats per day. Is what is what's spouted as the recommendation. But I guess it would just have as little as possible with that stuff, guys. This not really disputed. No one, unlike with the red meat stuff, no one's going, "Nah, man, have heaps of deli meats. They're amazing for you." It's pretty much the consensus that like, yeah, probably try to minimize as possible. Is that fair, Matt?
I mean, it's relatively fair. I think the deli meats even is a tricky scenario because we've got to factor in what do we normally have with those deli meats kind of situation. It's usually a very bland sandwich with nothing much else in it. I think if we pair the deli meats with the positive phytonutrients from plant sources, it really negates pretty much all of the negative factors in those deli meats, considering that a large proportion of the let's say additives to those deli meats tend to be of the nitric variety, nitrogen based, and then of course plants tend to have a lot of nitrogen in them, but we don't see the same negative health outcomes from plants alone. So it seems to be that there are some factors inside of plants, and specifically leafy greens, that are counteracting some of the potentially negative health outcomes from the theorized additives towards the processed meats.
Cool. Yeah. So, okay, that's really interesting because I'm not familiar with any of that sort of stuff. But the red meats, how is it? So you said you disagree. Can you take me through like a bit of a debunk? I'm a vegan. I say red meat causes cancer. Can you take me through a bit of a debunk as to how you go about that?
Yeah. I think it's a look. I can never speak in solids. The literature on this is quite grey, and I think it's grey in both for and against. So for the red meat specifically, I know there's a ton of positive benefits and ton of nutrients that we get from that. However, we don't necessarily see in terms of the people who consume red meat having a lot of red meat having, let's say, positive habitual habits surrounding their dietary and health lifestyle. So I'm very much leaning on the side of I don't know the statistics behind it from a statistician perspective. I'm not by any means a master in mathematics, but I suspect that removing the human factor as a residual variable is extremely difficult and almost impossible to isolate just the red meat from the entire potential lifestyle of habits that are inducing the negative health outcomes.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and this is always my go-to when I talk about when people ask me what, because I like to use the word confounding variable a lot, and that leads to the eventual question of, oh, what's a confounding variable? And this is always my go-to example of people say red meat causes cancer, and then going through the rabbit hole that Matt just discussed. So people that red meat probably less likely to be health conscious in comparison to those that are vegans. They're also probably likely to be, which leads down the line to, they're also probably likely to be probably smoking more, drinking more. What sort of foods do you eat when you have more red meat? Chips and foods high in saturated fats. Red meat's inherently high in saturated fats. So there's a bunch of things at play. Probably likely to exercise less because they're overall less health conscious. This is very, very much generalizations. Yeah, you've obviously got a lot of people who are going to be eating red meat who are extremely health conscious. Of course you are, but your average typical person on a population scale, they're going to be meeting these factors. Which, again, that's what Matt's saying. How can we isolate these things? How can we isolate it to just the red meat when we're looking at a bunch of things? Smoking, exercise, other foods they're eating in conjunction with the red meat, what the red meat has in it of itself. Yeah, because it's fine to say that red meat causes cancer, but if you're actually saying is saturated fat causes cancer, which is a whole nother thing we can go down, that's not red meat. That's saturated fat. Yeah. So they're two very different topics. Yeah. In that red meat has saturated fat in it. So that means red meat does, but a million things have saturated fat in them.
Absolutely. Coconut products, for example.
Yeah. So, yeah, I guess that's the point. Is that how do you separate those two from each other? And that's always my favorite example to use when I'm talking about why nutrition science is difficult and how we can really need to use our brains whenever we hear a claim like that red meat causes cancer. We really need to use our brains to think about How true is this statement?
What is the evidence behind it? How accurate is the data that we're using to acquire that outcome?
Yeah.
And that's a great segue into the different variables that come across from a generalized health perspective. This is probably the more sensitive topics that I'll enter now. It's a generalization for the people who are overweight and or obese, is that the potential for nutrient deficiencies and suboptimal intake of certain nutrients tend to be a little bit higher for specific nutrients. We know that fiber, every 10 grams of fiber, is a 5 to 10% decrease in total cancer risk, which is insane.
What?
It's absolutely nuts. So I'm pretty much, I'll die on that hill. It's absolutely awesome. And we're seeing a massive increase of bowel cancer rates in young adults. And it seems to be ridiculous in terms of what's actually going on. I personally don't have a theorized mechanism for it.
Well, I do.
Go on.
I think equally and oppositely, we just ranted about how red meat. I think we should also go equal and opposite. Matt and I are obviously inclined to like fiber. Yeah, we want to support fiber, and if we see evidence that indicates to us that more fiber equals good, we're less likely to be critical of it. But I think we should equally apply the critical lens to that. What types of populations tend to eat more fiber? All those same types of things, right? People who are more health conscious, people who are exercising more, people who are eating more fruits, vegetables, whole grains, yeah, less saturated fats, less issues for, they're eating a lot of food that's highly processed. There's so many different things as to why people would be eating, especially 10 grams more fiber per day. That's a lot. You're someone who's eating 10 grams of fiber a day versus 20 grams of fiber a day, they have very, very different diets.
Absolutely. That was really well said, Max.
So,
absolutely.
So yeah, for me, it's clear as day, and that we need to apply the same critical lens, whether we like the claims or dislike the claims. Because of course, both Matt and I, we have an emotional attachment to red meat, right? So we're going to want to defend it. We're going to want to be no. So we've got to try and be as unbiased as what we can to for both sides of the spectrum, whether we like or dislike the claim.
That is such a great point. Really, really great point. And I think you could apply the same to all the nutrients that I'm about to mention as well. So vitamin D tends to be one that's quite interesting. There is a ton of research that supports that vitamin D intake is pretty protective against certain cancers, especially if you're ensuring that you're not deficient. People who are obviously more health conscious are going to be spending more time outside. Probably vitamin D levels are going to be within that normal range and not in a deficient state. Magnesium specifically has a key role in maintaining DNA synthesis as a regular thing, ensuring that the function is normal and ensuring that if there ever is any problems, it's dealt with by the human body. Magnesium is extremely difficult to get for a lot of the population because we just don't aim for those sources, being your nuts, your legumes, and of course a lot of vegetables that come alongside that. That ties into the fiber as well. If we jump a little bit...
Sorry, all these things, just a preface, just in between while he's doing it. Remember, with all these things, just like if you were to take, it's not Metamucil, is it? What's the thing where the fiber, you just drink it?
Yeah, it's Metamucil or a dietary fiber supplement. Yeah.
With all these things, if you had the exact same diet as what you're having now, everything is the exact same, and the only thing you change is you wake up in the morning, you have 5 pills with your magnesium and vitamin D, blah, 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 and you have your Metamucil drink, and you go, yes, I'm ticking all the boxes, baby. All done. Do not be disillusioned. This is that would be such a poor decision to make, just on the basis that this is a lifestyle thing, that you're not getting all the other benefits of that. If you were to be doing all these things through whole foods, there's obviously a point to it. Like, it wouldn't be doing nothing, but the degree to which it's improving your life is going to be way less than what we'd predict from what these studies are showing from real life people in the real world.
Beautifully said. Well said, Max. I completely agree. You probably see a slight benefit from having a Metamucil supplement, but nowhere near the absolute mammoth that is consuming the same amount of fiber through whole foods and vegetables. I think if you're looking at it from a supplement perspective, and I like to reference the lycopene example in tomatoes. There's a chemical in tomatoes called lycopene, generally pretty anti-inflammatory, pretty good for our health from what the evidence suggests. But if you take that lycopene out of the supplement and you put it in, out of the tomato and you put it in a supplemental form, and you take it out of the carbohydrate matrix that protects it from being oxidized and reduced in terms of its total efficiency of benefit to us, we've almost completely removed the ability for lycopene to be positive. So if you're removing the entire ability for that nutrient to be beneficial and putting it in supplement form, you're almost kidding yourself in terms of thinking that it's actually beneficial. And to be clear, we don't know everything about nutrition. There is an absolute ton that we are not aware of. And I think leaning towards supplemental forms in terms of a lot of aspects can be almost working against our goals. And hence why we generally recommend a food first approach. Don't get me wrong. If I could take a couple pills on a daily basis and know for absolute certainty that I'm not going to need to eat for the rest of the day and have everything moving along smoothly, I pretty much would. I don't have that much of an attachment to food. It sounds like a pretty good deal to me. But unfortunately, at that point, despite my passion towards it, I can't have a single drink during the morning and then be fine for the rest of the day.
Yep, 100% agree. Yeah, that's really, really well said. That was absolutely perfect. So I guess it just shows that you need to be doing a lot more. You need to be having actual foods rather than synthetic vitamins and minerals to keep you going and see all these benefits we're talking about.
Absolutely.
Matt, does that pretty much cover the whole role of nutrition overall in developing cancer? So I guess our point of view would be that in this second case scenario, and we'll probably do a summary at the end because we've got one more case scenario to go through. In this second case scenario, we're saying that nutrition does play a significant impact and role into your the chance of you developing cancer overall, but it's probably not going to be a really, really big stepping stone. Unlike other things, it's definitely going to be lower on the list in comparison to your genetic factors or the other elements at play as to whether for example, your smoking status as to whether or not you're going to develop cancer. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, it's definitely tricky. I think just acknowledging that we have a couple of other nutrients being EFAs, essential fatty acids, and PROOFs as well. We'll put it off to the side for now. No, you're good. You're good. I think it's probably a conversation that's too boring for the podcast anyways. If I was to make like a tier list, we've probably got your genetic factors up the top, followed by your smoking status and or exposure to carcinogenic chemicals, then probably followed by your obesity and or overweight status. But this is probably the most controversial one, which can be mixed around. That's why I wanted to have this conversation. Then followed by exercise, nutrition, and other lifestyle factors.
Awesome. Well, that's really cool that you said that, because that leads perfectly into our final case scenario. So just in case people aren't following along, so the first case scenario was if we've got what was it? One person. Yeah. So two people are doing everything right from a nutrition, training, exercise, sleep, stress point of view. One of them is a BMI of 20, one of them is a BMI of 28. Who's more likely to develop cancer? And we concluded that, after some discussion, we said that, probably the person who's a BMI of 28 is more likely to develop cancer. And then we had, again, two people in comparison to each other, both a BMI of 20, but one of them does everything perfectly and one of them does everything perfectly except for nutrition. And who's more likely to develop cancer? And again, we concluded probably the latter person. And then finally, we're going to discuss for the last thing is that if we've got a person with a BMI of 28, they're doing everything absolutely perfect, versus a person with a BMI of 20 who's doing everything perfect except for their nutrition. They've got trash. They've got absolute dog shit nutrition. Let's have a little chat, because this is probably the most nuanced one, right? This is probably the one where it's really super speculative. They're obviously all speculative to some extent, but really super speculative in that now we're essentially saying what matters more, weight versus nutrition.
Yeah. That's such an interesting topic to go through. I think I could go on a little bit of a tangent here, Max. Do you want me to go through?
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. So nutrition as a whole, we need to establish what is actually going on. We say they have bad nutrition, or is it more so just like a bad dietary lifestyle choices, or is it active deficiencies? Because that is quite common in terms of if you say you have bad nutrition, very easy to come across deficiencies if your focus is just on a couple of food groups, or you exclusively eat like potato chips, for example, or something similar.
Yeah, so I guess for me, I would say that they don't have any deficiencies. They don't have anything that's like immediate. Secondary to the fact that they have a multivitamin every day and they get all of their vitamins and minerals are taken through supplement form. Same as fiber. So everything is under fiber. The only other food they eat is 10 Krispy Kreme donuts every single day. Let's pretend that this person doesn't need to have any protein or fat or whatever, because obviously they die pretty quickly. But yeah, in this case scenario, it's 10 Krispy Kreme donuts, and they have a few pills every day to make sure they don't have any deficiencies.
Yeah,
take me through your thought process.
So a couple of pills a day just to reach the point of no deficiencies, but definitely not in the suboptimal to optimal range. So it's just barely getting by.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh.
Because otherwise that would change the outcome of the...
Okay, let's say just barely getting by. Yeah.
Sure. That's quite tricky. That's definitely quite tricky.
Is this something you need to ponder on for a little bit, and we can start it off for the next podcast before we get into the real acronym? Or do you reckon you can spit it out now?
Look, Max, I think that might be appropriate. I don't think I can come up with an answer realistically, and I don't think I could be confident in providing a concrete answer for yes or no. If it was a situation of person has multiple deficiencies and their nutrition is absolutely appalling versus a person who is like 6 or 7 BMI points higher, I would say the person who is 6 or 7 BMI points higher is probably going to be healthier. Mm-hmm. But the scenario is they're just getting by, they're not optimized in anything. Realistically, how much can they get from the point of just barely getting by to optimal nutrition overall? And how much of an impact does that have with health? I think it's best if we leave it between the casts. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I love the way you're going about it. We can film that next week. You got plenty of time to research up, have a think about it, clarify all your arguments, and then you can kind of determine, because at the moment we've determined that weight seems to be a poor thing for developing cancer. So is poor nutrition. But now we're kind of battling these two. Which one matters more at the end of the day? That's what we'll talk about. So we'll start the podcast with that next week. And then we'll get into our real acronym, which is super exciting. So look forward to that next week, and we'll see you there.
Awesome. Thanks so much for listening, guys. Cheers.
See ya.
Thank you so much for listening to the Real Health and Nutrition podcast. The sponsor of today's show is you. You support this show by listening and using our services of dietitian consultations and performance coaching. We offer in-depth one-on-one consultations to help you achieve your health and performance goals. Any random bloke online can give you a generic meal plan where we here at R.E.A.L work collaboratively with you to reach your goals, making you feel heard and including you in your journey's planning. Our service offers tailored advice and can accompany meal plans and or realistic nutrition strategies, which can be booked via our website, www.recoveryexerciseandlifestyle.com. That's www.recoveryexerciseandlifestyle.com. Just a quick disclaimer, this podcast is for education, information, and general entertainment purposes only and does not constitute the practice of medical nutrition therapy or healthcare of any discipline. The content discussed in this podcast is not intended to be a substitute of professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please review our terms of use via our website. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.